Hey, this is Dan from Tiny Home Builders. In this video, I'm going to be doing a review of the Renogy Lycan 5000 power station, so stay tuned. So a couple of weeks ago, Renogy reached out to us and asked us if we wanted to try out and review one of their power stations. They had seen that we were writing about them and recommending some of their products in some of our blog posts. We've used Renogy products for a long time. We've been really happy with them, so we recommend them. So they saw that and they asked about the power station. And honestly, in the write-ups that we've done for tiny house power, we generally don't recommend power stations because if you don't know what a power station is, it's a box that has basically everything you need for solar except for the solar panels. It's got the inverter, the charge controller, the batteries, and that sounds great. I mean, it is truly an easy way to get into solar. You just buy a product, plug in the solar panels, and you're good to go. The problem with them though, is that they're generally just too small to power much. I have a power station, a real small one, and it's great for like little camping trips or something, or maybe, I don't know, if the power goes out, powering some lights, but generally they're just not very big and can't power a lot. Now there are companies that are coming out with bigger ones, but anyways, they offered to send us one, and I was like, well, I'm not crazy about power stations necessarily, but sure, we'll give it a try. Well, this thing shows up, and it is not a typical power station. This thing shows up on a crate. It is a two-man move. It is a big power station. And we threw a lot of stuff at it. We tried to overload this thing, and we were able to overload it, but it can handle a lot. It's definitely big enough to power an RV for an extended period of time, or even a tiny house. So the first thing we did when we got this thing was unbox it. It comes on a pallet in a giant wooden crate. I mean, a lot of power stations come, because they're smaller, they come in cardboard boxes, you know, like most electronics. This thing comes giant. It comes in a crate. So it's fully assembled. The only thing we had to do was we had to attach the handle to it. The handle is to make sure it can fit in the crate. The handle's not attached, but that's basically it. It's strapped down to the crate with some metal, so you take that metal off, and that metal, that screw that holds it onto the crate, is also used as the grounding screw, so definitely keep that. It's a two-person lift to get it off the crate. It's heavy, so you know, take it seriously. When you look in the instructions, it says it needs to be grounded before it turns on. It can operate without it being grounded, but it is a safety precaution. So grounding, if you don't know, is basically just a metal rod that goes into the ground, and it gets connected to anything that's electronic, that's metal, that can be touched. And so in the event that there's a malfunction and some hot wire touches the metal component, if it's not grounded, that metal component, that metal shell in the case of this Lycan 5000, will become charged, and if you touch it, you could become, you know, you could get shocked. So by grounding it, you're basically taking a metal rod into the ground, running a wire from that metal rod, attaching it to the metal case, and in the event of that malfunction where the hot touches the case, the electricity will have a path of least resistance to go right into the ground, and it will probably more than likely throw the breaker because that's a short circuit. So in my case, I did not have access. The recommended grounding method is either with the metal rod. I did not have access to that in my garage. There is a metal rod at everybody's house. It's just usually over by the breaker, the outside breaker box, the main cutoff. I was not near my breaker box either, so I couldn't access I couldn't get access to that ground either. So in my case, what I did was I did have access to a plug in my garage, which was a NEMA 1430, which is a 240 volt 4-prong plug. And that one of those prongs is a ground. So what I did was I bought a plug that would fit into there, and then I wired up a wire that, instead of wiring up all the wires so that there's two hots and a neutral and a ground, I wired up just a single wire to it, which was just the ground. And so now when I plugged it in, I could go ahead and connect that and then basically borrow the ground from that plug. Now, one thing I did do before I connected this thing to my unit is I went ahead and used a contactless tester to make sure that I didn't accidentally do something wrong and didn't accidentally charge the wire. So the contactless tester, you just hold it near the wire and it will beep if there's electricity in there, if it's gonna shock you. So I just did that as a little bit of a precaution. I was looking at it, I was certain that I didn't make a mistake, but I just wanted to double check. Once you've got it off the crate, it's time to turn it on. Now, a lot of power stations, a lot of products just in general, when you go to turn it on, it's one button press and it's on. The Renogy Lycan is not that way. You know, there is a procedure to turn it on, and that's probably going to be off-putting to some people. But let me tell you, it is a pro, not a con. It's, you know, con-wise, it is several steps. You've got to open up several sides of it and turn on different things. But the reason you do that is because the product is actually made up of a bunch of smaller individual products that are bolted together. It's kind of like you created a solar system and put it all in this, you know, and did a really good job of putting it all in one really nice compartment. And so all the pieces are individual pieces that you can buy that are separate pieces. And why that's such a benefit is if something goes wrong over time, you can upgrade it or you can replace the pieces. With most power stations, you can't do that. It's one product. If it's out of warranty, you know, it's no repairable pieces necessarily inside of it. So it's, you know, it is, yes, when you go to turn it on or when you go to turn it off, you've got to open up the different compartments to do that, but it is by far a big advantage to be able to have all of those individual components that are replaceable and potentially upgradable. So to turn it on, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to open up the side compartment that's on the front. That's the side that's got the little window. In there is a breaker that you turn on so that you can provide power from the batteries to the inverter. The switch for the inverter is kind of hidden. It's underneath the inverter, which is a little awkward, but you reach underneath there and flip that on. On the back side, you open that up and that's going to expose the batteries. And the batteries need to be turned on, but the batteries are connected to each other. So when you turn on one, the other one will automatically get turned on. Next, you're going to want to close that door. I don't lock it. I mean, they definitely recommend locking it if you've got kids around. There are live electrical components in there, so it's probably recommended to lock it. The plug is a 20 amp plug. So one of the prongs is turned sideways. So you will need a 20 amp plug to be able to power this thing, which, you know, not everybody has, but it is required. Next, after you've got the plug turned in, or plugged in, you go ahead and turn that breaker on to power, supply power from the outlet into the inverter, which is then going to start charging the batteries. And then that's it, it's turned on. So not a single button press, but also not too difficult. Once you've got the unit powered on, you're going to want to connect it to the app. Now there is an LCD screen on the inverter that will give you some insights into how the device is behaving, but I'll tell you that that's behind a glass window that you have to open up. The menu is not necessarily the best menu. The app is super easy to use, so I highly recommend installing the app. That's available on Android and iOS. It's called Renogy DC Home. Now the app is going to communicate with the Lycan through Bluetooth. And so there is a Bluetooth receiver. In fact, when you look through the window on the Lycan, you can see the little Bluetooth receiver. That Bluetooth receiver gets connected to a little Ethernet hub that's inside. I don't know if it's really Ethernet, but the plugs kind of look like Ethernet. There's a little hub inside the device that both the batteries go to and the inverter goes to. Now, when you initially do the connection, you have to unplug one of those so that it only finds one, and then you will switch which one is plugged in and which one's not plugged in, and do another add device for the app to connect to another device. Once you've connected all the devices, you can plug them all back in and you're good to go. You don't have to do this process anymore. So again, it's a little bit of a weird thing because it's made up of multiple devices, that there's not just a single Bluetooth button. You've got to unplug wires. When I first saw it, I'm like, what am I doing? I'm unplugging wires to get this thing to connect. But it is, again, going back to the benefit of being able to have all the individual components, it's worth it. You do it one time and then you connect to the app and you're done. You never do it again. So the actual procedure to connect to the Lycan is you open up the battery side compartment, and in there you're going to find the little hub, and you're going to disconnect the top plug, which is the plug to the batteries. Then you open up the DC Home app, and in the top right corner, you've got a little plus sign. You click on that, you click Add Device. It takes a second to discover it through Bluetooth, and you can see there that it's discovered the inverter. You go back into the cabinet, you plug the battery one back in, the top plug back in, and then you unplug the bottom plug, and then you go back and click on the plus again and add devices, and now this time it's gonna find the batteries. Once it finds the batteries, you go back to the Lycan, you plug in the other plug that you just unplugged, and then you close up the side and you're all done. Connecting the Lycan to solar is really straightforward. In my case, I'm using 4 panels. I have 400 watt panels that are from Renogy. They've actually upgraded these panels since I got them, so they're, I think, a little bit more efficient. I think they might be up to 500 watts. But the Lycan will take a vast array of different voltages and wattages when you connect the panels to them. So you're not limited to a certain set of panels. You can just set, you can really pick anything you got. When you look at it, there are 2 connections for it. There are 2 sets of connections for solar panels. And so it's just using regular Anderson connectors, you just plug them in. The only gotcha, I would say, is that you want to make sure that if you're using both of them, both solar arrays are the same. So in other words, don't connect a 100 watt panel on one of the arrays and then a 400 watt panel on the other arrays. They should match up. In this case, I'm charging the Lycan with solar, and I have a load on it at the same time where I'm charging my Rivian. So I'm pulling quite a bit of power from it. So to put this thing through the test, my brother happened to show up with his RV the day that I got this thing, and I was like, what better timing, we can plug in his RV. I used to have an RV, and let me tell you, there was many times. Mine was a bumper pull RV. It did not have solar. It did not have, it had 1 battery on it, just the battery that it came with. I think I had switched out with lithium ion at one point. But the air, there's not a lot of DC stuff. I didn't have an inverter, so I couldn't run the AC. And one place where I really wish I had something was my family. We would travel and we would go to campsites, but a lot of times we would stop at Walmart parking lots, which is very common with RVs. You stop at a Walmart parking lot and you could stay the night, And on a cool night, we would, we'd show up, we'd go in, we'd do some shopping at Walmart, and then we'd come back out and play, we didn't have TV necessarily. I had a little power station at that time, and so we could watch a little bit of TV and run the lights and stuff, and the battery would run the lights, but we would sit there and play a game. It was a perfect opportunity to kind of get away from the devices a little bit. And it was great. We absolutely loved it if the night was cool. But if, so we did that like 3 or 4 times. We're like, man, the Walmart parking lot, parking is the best. But then all of a sudden, one time we did it and it was hot. And I just remember my family's complaining. I'm sweating at one point at the night. I woke up and I went out and sat in the car for a little bit and ran the air conditioning. It was a little miserable. So all of a sudden we were a little bit more selective on when we would stay there. And at the time I'm thinking, man, it would be great if I had a generator, but my RV didn't have a generator built in. But then I'm like, I'm running the generator all night. That's noisy. I don't want to do that in a Walmart parking lot. I got to worry about theft. I got to worry about, all the gas that I'm using, all the fumes and everything. And so the best option would have been a power station, but you can't typically run an air conditioner off of a power station because they're just too small. Well, with this Lycan, you can definitely do it. So my brother shows up, we connect his RV to it, and at first he says he turns off everything. I go in there later on, come to find out he's got lights and TVs on. But when he thinks everything is off, his version of everything, it's drawing 400 amps, and it's gonna last a long, long time. This Lycan is gonna last a long time, only drawing 400 amps. So then what we did was we slowly just started adding things in. He's like, well, let me turn on the air conditioner. Let me turn on the electric water heater, the 6-gallon electric water heater. And his RV is quite a bit smaller than mine, but it's got the same size air conditioner. It's got the same size water heater. It's got the same size refrigerator. So even though it's smaller, all of the devices that use electricity are the same. So we end up maxing out his RV to max out the Renogy, see if we can blow it, see if we can make it shut off. It got close. It did not. That thing has 3,600 watts available to it. It was getting close, but that's with the air conditioner running. We opened up the refrigerator to make sure that it was running, which the refrigerator is not going to run all the time. He had the water heater. Again, that electric water heater is not going to run all the time. And even with everything running at the max, it still had 6.5 hours of capacity. So for me, putting this thing back in the day when I had my RV, if I could put that in the back of my truck and tie it down, then when I pull up in an RV parking lot, I plug in my RV. I've got air conditioning. I've got all the amenities that I want. which would be great on those hotter nights. And then you show up at the RV park, you plug it in and you recharge it. Perfect. So given that the Lycan has enough power to power an RV when we have everything on, a tiny house is not that much different as far as its power consumption. Obviously there's houses on the really high end, really large size that have higher power needs. But again, just like an RV, sometimes even a bigger house doesn't really use that much more power because they still only have one air conditioner, they still only have one water heater. So, but given that it's got enough power to power an RV, it's gonna have enough power to power a tiny house. And I know that because we've done the research on what the power needs are, and 3,000 watts is really kind of like a sweet spot for a moderately sized, middle-sized house. And this has got 3,600 watts. So it's definitely got the power to, it can produce enough power. Does it have enough capacity though? Probably not. So when we were looking at it, when we were pushing that to the max, we got 6.5 hours out of it. That's with no power coming in. So if you had solar or you had shore power that you could rely on most of the time, that would be fine. But if you're just gonna be off grid, it's not got enough capacity. But it can be upgraded, it can be expanded as far as capacity. You don't have to change out any of the internal components. It has plugs right on the outside where you just plug in additional batteries. So I would build, the nice thing about this, you buy a house or you have a house that is not off grid at all, you would build like a small shed outside basically that would store, this thing is waterproof, but I wouldn't wanna, you spend a lot of money on this thing, I wouldn't want it to be sitting outside, but you build a little shed, you put that thing in there, you put a stack of batteries, you plug your house in there instead of shore power, and suddenly you've got an off-grid house, and you'd have solar powers as well, or solar panels as well. So it's just probably one of the easiest paths that you could take to make your house off-grid electrical-wise. One other use for this thing, if you can power a tiny house, one other really great use for this thing that I could see is having it as emergency backup. Now it has plugs right on it, so if you want to use just extension cords when you have when the power goes out, that's one way to do it, but that's going to be kind of a pain in the butt. Every time the power goes out, that's what I do right now. The power goes out, I'm running around, running extension cords through the house, and then, guaranteed the second I get the last extension cord out, the power's coming back on. So it's definitely not the best way to do it. Having this thing now though, what I'm planning on doing is integrating a transfer switch, okay? So what a transfer switch is you've got power coming in from the utility company that goes into your breaker box, and then from that breaker box, power lines go out and service your house, right? Well, a transfer switch sits beside your breaker box, and what it allows you to do is before the power that comes in from the utility company, before it goes out to, let's say, your kitchen, it runs through this transfer switch where there's a switch that allows you to switch where the power is coming from. Is it coming from the utility company or is it coming from another source? Okay, that's what the transfer switch, kind of the name fits, right? So this transfer switch, obviously if it's gonna let you select a different source, it has a plug for that other source. So you take your power bank and you plug that, or your generator, they can be used for generators as well, you plug that into the transfer switch, and then when the power goes out, you can go down there and flip a switch, and then instead of the power coming from the utility company, which is no longer supplying power, it then starts to take power from your external source, your generator, or in this case, the Lycan, and it starts to send the power out to your house. What's really cool about this is it can be very selective on where you send the power out, because these transfer switches have like 6 switches in them, and you more than likely don't want to switch your entire house over to any kind of external source unless it's this giant diesel generator, because your house uses a lot of power, right? You've got air conditioners, you got all sorts of things, and if you went over there and just transferred your entire utility, what your utility company provides you, you switched it all over to another source, more than likely you're going to deplete that source pretty quickly. So with a transfer switch, you might select very specific legs in your house, power lines in your house that you want to switch over. Like for me, it would definitely be my refrigerator, my kids' rooms, my bedroom, perhaps the family room, and then the power goes out, you go down, you flip the switch, and all of a sudden now you know, you've got the Lycan turned on, you flip the switch, suddenly now your refrigerator has power again, and there's no possibility that when the power comes back on, that all of a sudden that power is gonna merge with your power and blow something, you know, blow the refrigerator. You have to deliberately switch the switches over. So a transfer switch is the way to go for it to make this as seamless as possible. They have automatic transfer switches, which will automatically detect when the power goes out and do the switch. But you know, to keep it reasonably priced, the manual transfer switch, it's not a big deal. You know, power goes out, you go downstairs, flip a switch, and all of a sudden you got power back in your house. That's, you know, that's pretty great.